Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But the problem is.
All right, young scholars, today we are going to continue our discussion related to CSS. And we're also going to bring in the aspect of creating forms within your web page. If you'll notice here, we have 3 slide decks. Thankfully, the responsive page layout, PowerPoint, we're not going to go through piece by piece. Just keep in mind that the idea behind responsive page layout is that you want to consistently adjust the way your pages look
Yes.
in order to meet all of your visitors' needs.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
So for example, you may want to have a setup 3 columns with your information. We saw 2 columns last week, 1 column, etc. The way you set your page up may determine how it is viewable or presentable on other mobile devices. So you want to keep that in mind. It's called responsive page layout because, like I said, you're consistently updating it to meet your visitors' needs. You're responding to their needs. So if they say your website has too much information on that main page, you may need to modify. Instead, maybe add more images, break up the text, etc. So the main focus of tonight will be talking about tables and forms. So that second slide deck there called tables is where we'll start off tonight. We'll go through tables and forms, and then we'll do an HTML example, which should help you with your homework for tonight. So tables and HTML are basically similar as if you would set up in Microsoft Word. They're used on web pages to organize certain information, composed of obviously rows and columns. Dylan, which way does a row go?
A row goes horizontal.
Yep. And the columns go up and down. So when you set up an HTML table, you're going to have your table tag, your TR tag, and your TD tag. So based on TR, what do you think that would be, Dylan?
Table resources.
No. What did we just talk about up here?
Table row.
Table row. Yep. And then TD is the individual cells. So here's an example. We have 3 columns: name, birthday, phone. We have 2 names listed with their birthdays and their phone number. So how many rows do we have? 1, 2, 3. How many columns do we have? 1, 2, 3. So
Wouldn't
if
it
you were to
be the other way around? Oh wait, no, you're right.
3 columns.
I
name,
thought you were
birth-
counting that as like one row. Okay, my bad.
So if you were to make this in like Microsoft Word to build a table, this would be a 3x3 table because you have 3 columns: name, birthday, phone, and 3 rows: name, Jack, Sparky. So again, the table tag is how you set up your table. TR tag is how you set up each of the rows. And the TD tag is each of your cells. You could also add a caption for the table if you so choose. More often than not, people will create an extra table row and put their title of their table there. So in this example, we are creating a table you just saw on the previous slide. Our caption: bird sightings, 2 rows, name and date. Within those rows, we have cells, Bobolink 52520. So we've created this top section here. Bird sightings is our caption. We created rows. We have cells, Bobolink 52520. You'll notice that that does not include that second there. You'll notice within the second row we created, we only added the cells Bobolink 52520. We did not use HTML code to create that next line because we've added it on the following slide. We now have that last row created. So you'll notice within each set, a table row, excuse me, you have to have matching cells. So if we create a row with 2 pieces of information, all of our rows have to have 2 pieces of information to match. Because if you have nothing in that cell, that box is now going to show up empty. There'll be nothing in it. So tables are pretty boring, as you've seen in creating them in Microsoft Word. So we use CSS in order to enhance. So in this example, we're going to create a solid border around our table. But we've done it for everything. Table, cells, height. So you notice that each cell now has a border around it. So in this example, we're creating a table. We have our table headers, name and birthday. We add James, November 8th. Then we add Karen, April 17th. And last, we add Sparky. You'll notice the difference, that the table heads are bold, name and birthday, as opposed to just putting it in as regular cells, as we did in the previous example. So the TH or table header element emphasizes basically what each column header is going to be. So go back and look when we just set it up as TD, the cell information, name and date. They're just regular. No bold, nothing. But when we use TH for table header, it emboldens them. There are other common attributes that we've seen with CSS so far that you might want to use with tables, like align, if you want it left, right, center, background color, border, cell padding, cell spacing, summary, and width. So instead of just padding, it's cell padding, because each individual box in your table is called a cell, just like you've seen in Excel. So similarly, you can have column span and row span and V-align. V-align is short for vertical align. So in this example, we're creating a column span of 2. Our TD means that that's a cell. But remember I said sometimes people do it like that, where they create the title within a cell? That's what they're doing here. Instead of using caption, we're creating one cell that'll tell us birthday list. So you'll see there. That matches our code here. Table row, just one table there, or one cell. Whereas below it, James and Karen each have their name as well as their birthday. So this is the more common way that individuals would create a table, with their header or title right within a table row as its own cell. So that column span 2 that you see there is setting it up so that it stretches that text over the other 2 columns that are created below. Like you see here, James 1108. If we set it as column span 3, it would make it even wider so that it would be over 3 separate columns. The reason you do that is you have 2 columns. If you had 3, you'd make it 3. If you made it 1, you had 2 columns, all of this birthday list would be jammed to stay right above James here. You could do the same thing with the row span attribute. And you see here the exact opposite. Instead of having that across the top of the columns, it now goes across the rows. So we set up, this spans 2 rows, and we have that first cell created. Then we create the second. You'll notice in the initial example, we created 1 at a time. Either way is perfectly fine, as long as you use the appropriate. So col span for columns and row span for the rows. Col span will go across, make sure it's even with however many number of columns you have. Row span will match however many rows you have. So again, this example, you have 2 rows, you use row span 2 to match your 2 rows. If you had 5 rows, you'd have that row span 5. So this way the text aligns and matches with however many number of rows you have. So as I touched on earlier, that TH tag that you saw creates the headings. So it's TH table headings. You could use it for either the column or row, depending on what you would like. Excuse me. In some instances, it might just be used as your attribute, you know, like you saw with the name and date example. Other people might use it as the title for the entire table. As you saw, it just basically bolds the topic there. So in this example, we're creating it as an ID. And then referring back to it. So now we match Bobolink with name and the date with the date. This is less common way of doing it, but if you had programming in the past, it's similar to inheritance. We could have just did it, you know, TD, Bobolink, TD, 520, and it would show up the same way. However, this is just showing you how you would use the ID method. So again, we have that caption instead of our header. So you notice the caption will go above the table. Whereas if you use table header, it boldens your titles. So here, if you had table header for name, it would bold it. If you had it for date, it would bold it. Like you saw in the earlier example, a lot of times you would have the table header set up using Colspan and make it over everything. So this would usually be set up as a TH so that the birthday list would be bold. So again, obviously, when you're using the align tag, that's going to determine your alignment. You could have it left, right, center. You could even align the entire table if you so choose. You can set the width to 75%. Make the width of your table smaller. You can make the entire table centered on your web page. Again, you could set the background color, the size of the cell padding, the spacing of the cell, the height of the cell, the vertical alignment of the cell, the width of the cell, and the border of the cells and the table itself. So this is quite uncommon, but you could use pseudo classes. If you remember inheritance from programming, you'll have a superclass and a subclass. You could pass everything down from the superclass to the subclass. So you're going to have a first of type and a child, a subclass, whatever can be passed down to it. There might be instances where you want to create table row groups. So looking at this, what do you think we're doing here? What table row groups do you think we're creating here?
Day and hours.
Yep, we're creating two different ones. One for the day, one for the hours. So this way we can match them within our table itself. Okay, Monday, 4 hours. Friday, 3 hours. This table might signify, you know, how many hours you're working that week, how many hours you have classes that day. So yeah, 4 hours of class on Monday, 3 hours of class on Friday. And the reason you like to group things together using tables, just like you would in Excel or Word, makes things look more organized. So that total, 18. So 4 and 3, obviously Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday have to produce 11. So here's an example of how that would work. Working Monday, 4 hours, Tuesday, 3 hours, Wednesday, 5, Thursday, 3, Friday, 3. But you'll notice that they all look different, right? Total day and hours looks different because we are defining them as headers. And you'll notice our caption timesheet is above our table. If we created it as a table header, we would want to use colspan 2 so that it spans across our column for day and our column for hours. So obviously pretty boring, and that's why we use CSS in order to enhance it. It often will make our HTML tables more visually appealing, right? So in this example, we just have a black, white, and gray table. It's not really any wow factor. We could create a background color. Let's say all of our days of the week are blue. All our hours we worked could be red, etc. It would add a little bit of dynamics to it. So what is most common when you're creating tables is to utilize forms. Now, so for this course, we're going over pretty basic stuff. So if you take the more advanced course 2106, in the spring, we'll cover the way real people or, professionals would create a form, and that would be using PHP. It prevents individuals from accessing all of the code. Basically prevents individuals from seeing all the information that's passed through. So with respect to a form, it's going to accept inputted information from a user that allows you to interact. So you might have a search form, order form, newsletter, sign up form, survey, add to cart, etc. So in this basic form example here, it's asking for your name, address, city, state, zip, and country as part of the shipping address. And you notice that each piece of the form has potential different outcomes. The name and address and city allow you to type input. The state is a dropdown. In this example, since it's also giving us a country dropdown, there might be more options than just our 50 states here in the US. And then the zip is also a text input. Even though technically it's a number, it's being set up just like in Java programming. Okay, it's more than, one technical integer. So we put it through as a string. So a form is an HTML element that contains and organizes all of these different form controls. We have these text boxes. We have these drop-down boxes. We have this continue button that allows us to process and push through information. So again, these would be very basic HTML forms that are used very sparingly these days, as most is done through PHP. Because if you go on an HTML web page, you can just right click, view page source, and everything from that page's HTML code pops up. Whereas with a PHP page, if you do that, it just shows you the basic HTML information. So there's two components when you're using the form: the actual form itself and the server-side processing. So that's what's interpreting all that information. So when you create a basic HTML one for homework tonight, basically it's just going to probably give you a pop-up or some kind of information saying, oh, okay, we pushed through. Whereas with a PHP form, if you were to create that, it would actually give you a pop-up. Okay, it went through. It emailed it to wherever you sent it to. Or, okay, no, we had an issue. There was some kind of problem. So when you use a PHP form, you have to have Apache on your web server. So if you just create a regular HTML form, like this, you could use it on your computer. It doesn't have to be on a web server anywhere. A PHP form does, because it's actually using that server side. So in creating a form, you use the basic form tag. It'll contain all the form elements you may need to put within it. The input tag configures the type of input you have. Text box, radio button, checks box, button, drop down, etc. So the text area tag will create a scrolling text box. You might have more than just a sentence to type in. So it's going to make the text box bigger and allow you to scroll as you're typing to look back through what you created. The select tag is for a dropdown. It will allow you to select. You could either select one or set it to where you could select multiple dropdown options. And the option tag is where you would put those options. You know, what's my favorite programming language? You might have Java, C++, Python, COBOL, etc. Those would all be your different options. So in this example, all we're doing is creating a simple form where you're just creating. All you're asking for is text input for an email. And it will populate an error, email required, if you don't put the information in. And you have two potential input type buttons to hit: submit or reset. So you would put in your email, you would hit the submit button when you're done, or if you made a mistake, you would hit the reset button. So all your form is doing is basically calling an action. We want the user to input something. So we put in that information. We need them to check the boxes, if you will.
It's a typical. Yeah, so this one here.
We might use the get method. You probably use that in programming. We're getting that information, we're retrieving it. And then the post method would be sending it back out. That's often used to check to see if your code is set up properly. Once you've gotten the information, if you post it and it looks like the information you put in, then you know your code is correct. So in this example, we've created an input that allows us to write text in to give our email. We may set up a name for it, or an ID, or a size, or a max length, or a value. The max length is how many potential characters you could put in. The value is the actual value that's passed in. So let's say, Dylan@hotmail.com might be the email. That would be the value. The max length would be how big it can be. So here's an example of the scrolling text box. You'll notice we don't have a scrollable text box in this example because we only have enter comments written. If we filled, let's say, 3 lines on here, you would then be able to have the option to scroll down or up to double check what we've typed in.
Yeah.
Often we use those scrolling text box in situations where we don't know how much information the user is going to type in. So it's quite commonly used when you're asking for comments or suggestions. You know, the comment may just be, oh, you know, this is a great website. You know, you might have a Karen or something that's going to write 5 paragraphs about the website. So you might have that scrolling text box option so that the individual has quite a bit of room to input information. So as I mentioned, your forms, the whole point is to trigger some kind of action. So in this example, we've created a submit button that says submit query. So a user will input their information, their comment, whatever it happens to be. And by hitting that submit query button, if it's just a basic HTML button in a basic HTML form, it'll probably just say, oh yeah, okay, we got your information. We got your query, thanks. Whereas with PHP, you could set it up to where you'll get an email. Okay, here's their query. Here's their question. Here's their complaint. Here's their suggestion. You'll get an email. They'll get a display saying, oh, okay, your query was sent off to, and it may even display the email. Whereas a reset button is commonly used just to clear the form. That's basically all it's geared toward. You made a mistake, okay, hit the reset button, clears everything. So here is a pretty easy sample example. So we would input first name, last name, email, and any comments.
So he's reading.
Then when you would hit the contact button, all that information goes where it goes. You hit the reset button, it would clear everything within the form.
I looked on your thing and I saw you had 2 more. That's what I was making sure you.
You could even use the input to accept file uploads. So if you wanted to upload a file onto a web page, you would click that input button. It would ask you basically to search for your file to upload. You'd select it and be able to push that file onto the server. So here's an example. You would select the browse button. You'd select your specific file. Instead of no file selected, it would then list rather, the file on the side. Then it more than likely would have a second option asking you, hey, okay, is this the correct file? You want to submit it? You want to upload it? And you'd go ahead and click that in order to upload the file. So another common example is to create a password. In this example, we're then hiding our password. In most common examples, it just gives black bullets when hiding. Some especially on programs, might just give hashtags when it's hiding certain symbols instead. So another possible input type would be checkboxes. Like I said, you could set these up just like a drop down to allow just one option to be selected or multiple options. So you might use all of these: Google Chrome, Firefox, Edge. We could add Safari. You might use all of them. So you might have to select all of them. You might only use one of them. You might use two of them. So providing the user with that option allows for the most accurate response. Because if you only allow one option here and you use all of them, you just pick, I guess, whatever one you use most. You don't have the option to pick all of them. So radio buttons are the same thing. They're those little circles with a smaller, darker circle inside, like a radio dial, if you've ever seen an older radio. Again, you could allow an individual to select just one option or multiple options with these. So in this example, we have the same options, but instead of a checkbox, which when you check it, a check will show up, it's now the radio button, where if you click it, a smaller, darker circle will show up inside your selected option. So as you saw earlier, with the password, you might want to produce a hidden. You don't want a user to see that information. This is very common with passwords. You go in on a website, it'll show just random dots. In a lot of cases, it also might pop up with a suggestion. Here's a suggested auto password for you. You could also use a select tag, which creates a list. Like I showed you earlier, the drop down might be all 50 states. The country drop down might have multiple different countries available for you to select. So you could have the drop down. Select your favorite browser. And then when you select, you have the possibility for a drop down list. So you create all of your options within your drop down or select list using the option tag. So here you obviously have 4 different options: home, products, service, about. But you'll notice it's scrollable. So we're only seeing 4 of the visible options. There might be 3 more, there might be 2 more, depending on how the scroll is set up. So while this is uncommon when using PHP, because they're set up to be as professional looking as possible, when you create an HTML form, they're pretty basic. You might want to use an image to spice them up. So you might have a login button with green background that looks like it's popping out just to attract a user to select it. This is the button tag, which in this example would be that login button. Most of the time you'll see, as I showed you, just submit or reset. Ideally, you want to create buttons solely for them to do something. They're a call to action. Submit sends the information. Reset will clear the information. What other kind of buttons might you want to have on a form? No ideas? What about like a suggestion? You might have a suggestion button, especially for a password. Like, oh, okay. You might only want to clear one piece of your form, not the entire form. So you might have resets available for each of your options. So in this example, instead of just having a submit or reset button, we've created a sign up button. Basically does the same thing as the submit, but it's telling the user, okay, you're now signed up. You've registered for this page, this article, directory, whatever the website might have been. You may be signing up for a email delivery blast of some kind, an RSS feed, whatever it may be. So you always want to keep accessibility in mind. Your label element, field set element, legend element, tab index attribute, and access key attribute will assist you in doing so. And we'll cover them momentarily. So with your label element, you're able to basically label each of your inputs. So we need an email. Okay, we have an email. Then we have to match the input type to it. Okay, our name is email, our ID is email. We have to match it to the label. You could set it up all in one line of code, or create your initial email label, and then set the input types, defining the name and ID on the second line of code. Again, your label should match your name and ID. This way, the information is passed to the appropriate type. So the field set element creates a visual group of form elements on a web page. The legend element helps you create a text label within the field set. So our legend, customer information. You've seen legends when you've created graphs, right? In like PowerPoint or Excel with charts. The legend shows the important aspects of your data. So in this example, our legend is customer information. First name, last name, email, all of that information within it is defined by our legend, customer info. Comments is not, excuse me, is not included in that, as you saw in the previous slide, because that is not our customer info. That's just comments. They may not have any. Some people might, just put no comments. Some people might not fill it out. Excuse me. So in this instance, you would probably want first name, last name, and email as required fields, and comments you may not have as a required field. You may allow a user to put nothing in there and still be able to click the contact button to send the information on to whether it's you, the boss, whoever. The tab index attribute is used to modify the default tab order. So we assign a numeric value. So you might have 8 different possible tabs here. You create an index of them, just like you would if you were creating an array in a programming course. Right? But in this example, your index starts at 1, whereas in programming, your index always starts at 0. So the access key attribute creates a hotkey combination to place the focus on the component rather. So you would do Control T as an example, or in this case, Control E, and it would jump to the part of your page where it asked you for the customer email. Uncommon, but like I said, HTML forms are kind of basic and outdated, but they have all of these capabilities. So in order to make a HTML form better, we'll often use CSS. So in this example, we're creating a background color for our entire form with a certain text family, the width 350, the padding 10 pixels. This way we have 10 pixels of space in between the left and our viewing point, and it will fit everything within that width, hopefully. We then create our labels to float left with a block. So that might be name as an example. And you have the text box to input your info. That label might be email. And you put in your possible answer. Then your label here might be comments because you have a scrolling text box. So you might have more room available for the user to put their information. And again, it looks exactly the same. Your label, 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 text box, text box, text box. You'll notice based on our CSS, we have that background color that's grayish. We have the padding. Everything is within that display area, that 350 pixels of width. You can similarly use a grid layout in order to style your form, but it'll look fairly the same as you see in the next example. We have label, 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 input, input, input. The last line, there's no label. We just have our submit button, our call to action. So you notice that it's fairly similar. However, we're doing grid column 2x3. You'll notice the width at 60% does not take up the entire screen. It's only 60% of it. This is commonly done when your users or visitors are more commonly on a mobile device, because they have less viewing panels or viewing screens size to view. So you probably heard this before, server-side processing. Your web browser takes a request from you to get to a website. It connects with the server and sends that page to your web page, onto your web browser. You, as the user, are on the client side. So you're going to the web browser, typing in the page you want to go to, whether it's ESPN.com, CNN.com, Yahoo.com, whatever it may be. If the server is not active,
Yeah.
no page is going to load. If you don't have internet connection, no page is going. So here is a common way of looking at it. That web client, which is you utilizing your browser, you send a request to the server to visit a website, get the information, load it. The server then sends that website back to you. It gives a response. So server-side scripting, like I keep mentioning, is commonly used with PHP. It's more dynamic and more protected. It's direct execution. You put in your information, it does something immediately. It either gives you an error message or it sends the information to where it needs to go. And I'll show you an example of a regular HTML form, and then I'll post, or if I can find it before class ends tonight, I'll show you the difference with a PHP form. So PHP and JavaScript are more commonly used for forms in order to protect your info and be able to send it off to a destination. Like I said, the most common way is to put your information that you put in and have it emailed to you. The example I have for my PHP form, you put in the info, it then shows a screen where it displays back out the information that you've posted. So the steps in utilizing this is similar. The web page invokes the server-side processing by the form or hyperlink. It executes the script. Then it accesses the database and returns the information. So you could set up a form where all that data you put in will get stored in a database online. Think of it like you're using Amazon. You put in your credit card, debit card information. It only asks you for it once, right? Once you save it, it's there. You can utilize it going forward as you need to. So the common reasons you might want to use server-side scripting is to search a database. Like I said, place an order on an online store like Amazon. You might want to send a web page to a friend or subscribe to a newsletter like an RSS feed. A lot of you probably use Reddit, right? Dylan, do you use Reddit?
Yes.
So once you save your password, it might ask you once in a blue moon if you want to change your password. Unless you clear your cache, you'll stay logged in. You don't necessarily have to remember the password or worry about it. So here's an example of a form. And like I said, I have an example like this. You would type in your name, email, and comments. Then when you hit submit, this demo.php code would spit out your information has been received, my name, whatever you put in the name, my email, whatever you put in the email, and my comments, whatever you put as your comment input. So you could use Form Buddy, Form Mail, Form Spree as online examples. You can visit these websites to learn more about Java server pages, which uses JavaScript, Cold Fusion, PHP, Ruby on Rails, and Microsoft's .NET framework. Here's another example. What is our input here?
Dr. Morse.
Yep. We're asking for email. So our text that we're going to put in is just Dr. Morris. But it gives us an error message because Dr. Morris is not an email, right? So if it was drmorris@gmail.com, okay, we're good to go. That's an email. It'll work. But because it's not set up as an actual email, input is rejected. Please enter an email address. In this example, we're creating an input to be telephone number format. So even though it says suggest a website, we did google.com. That's a website. It says, please enter a URL. How come?
Because it's possible that you're supposed to have the HTTPS:// as part of the URL.
What are we setting it as? Even though it says suggest a website, we want it in telephone number format. So this is going to keep screwing everybody up because they're not going to know that suggest a website means to put in a telephone number. So when you set your input type, you have to make sure that it's correct. If it's a text, define it as a text. If it's a radio button, make it a radio button. Don't ask for a website and have it set as telephone. Nobody's going to know to put in a telephone number when you're saying suggest a website. They don't match, right? Exception handling from Java programming. Input mismatch. You're asking for a telephone as your input, but they don't know that. It says suggest a website. Another possibility is to use a search option. You want to go on a website and look to see if something is on there that you're looking for, a topic that you like. You would use a search button or attribute. Very common on blogs. You might have a certain topic you're interested in. You use the search in order to find what you're looking for. So in this example, we're creating a select list or drop down called favorite color. And we're given the options of red, green, blue, yellow, pink, black. We could either type it in or select it from our dropdown. So B and L obviously produce blue and black as the options that come up. If you were to type in G, it would just show you green. If you would type in Y, it would just show you yellow. But if you type something in that was not an option here, it's not going to show you anything. So if you were to type in purple, after you get past the P, which will show you pink, once you get to PU, nothing's going to show up. There's no options. You could do the same thing to create, let's say, on a scale. So in this example, we've created a scale where you could choose between 1 and 100. You know, well, what's my grade going to be in the class? Oh, 100. Up 97. Whatever you would happen to select. Where have you seen this? Dylan, did you have a guess?
The slider?
No, like a setup like this. It may not
Oh.
necessarily be a slider.
I guess if I had to pick a number between 1 or 100 and it says too high or too low. Or, you know, the slider specifically, the bottom right of PowerPoint has a slider. But it's for a different functionality.
The slider here determines the size of the screen. Right now I have it set at 74%. If I were to make it bigger, it would expand that viewing screen. But you see this type of situation all the time. Like rate my professors, 1 to 5. Rate your professor. You buy something on Amazon, you give it feedback, 1 to 5. You click a button to do the rating. It may not necessarily be a slider like this of 1 to 100, but there is a scale. 1, you really didn't like the product, it was awful. 5, this was the greatest product ever. I'm going to give good feedback, right? Same type of option. So in this example is more like what Dylan said. You choose any number, but it displays it as a drop-down or select list in this option. So you have 3 here, you could press the down button to go down, the up button to go up. But it's only going to allow you to select one of those numbers. You can't select 22 because your max is 10. If you wanted to select 22, you'd have to go in and change your max to at least 22 to cover it. Similarly, you could use the My Date label in order to allow someone to choose a date. When do you commonly see this?
When I'm supposed to select my birth date on like a website, or when I'm searching on Gmail looking for the date of an email.
Okay. Sometimes you might go on a website that wants to know your date of birth, you know, social media. You got to be 13 or older to use it. So you select your date of birth. Okay. We verified that you're over 13. You're old enough to use the social media site. And then you're allowed to access or register for the website. Similarly, you could do the same thing with the color wheel or color well and select a different color. Obviously, this is kind of useless with a form, right? Who's just going to have a form that asks you to select color? Doesn't help anybody, but that's an example. So here's another example of a form. We're going to ask for comments. You'll notice the asterisks. We're now requiring everything except the rating. There's no asterisk next to it. So we could just leave the rating alone, whatever it may be. But we definitely have to input a name, an email, and comment. So as I mentioned, HTML only using, or forms rather, only using HTML are pretty boring and basic and limited in what they can do. So they're often enhanced with CSS for look and enhanced with PHP and JavaScript to work more effectively. So go ahead and open up that HTML editor from W3 Schools that I provided you guys. The link to earlier in the semester, w3schools.com/html tryit.asp. And we're going to create an example form. While you're pulling that up, I am hopefully going to be able to get to my website to show you. Okay, good. So we're going to show you an awful boring HTML form example here. So we open our HTML tag, we close it. Next, we open our head or header tag. And within the header tag, we're going to have a title. Dylan, what should I call this?
Form.
Okay, form. Then we close our title. What goes after the head?
The body.
Yep. But I just realized I'm doing a table example first. So I'll change the title from form to table. So I'm just going to create a header one called sample table. I'm going to set our table border to be 1. This way we can see a border around my table and see specifically where they are. So how do I start a table?
The table tag.
We already did the table tag. Table.
Oh, you do a caption maybe, and then the TR.
So we'll start with our TR, our table row. Then we're going to create table headers. We're going to do name, age, and city. Then I have to close that set of table rows. Then I create
There you go.
a new set of table rows. But this time, instead of table headers, I do TD for our cells. Because I have name, age, and city, I have to match those. So give me a name. Nobody's got a
Dylan.
name? Dylan? Okay. Give me an age.
19.
Okay. Give me a city.
I guess Monroe Township.
Okay. Now, since we've matched 3 and 3, we close out our second row. And then you go ahead and do the same for every new individual you want to name. So, let's add Dan to the table now. And let's say that Dan is 22. And that Dan is from, let's say, Keyport. We've got all our 3. We then close that table row out. Then we'll create one last table row. Let's use John as this example. And let's say that he's 24. And let's say he is from Union. Then make sure that you close out your last table. And when we run that, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to have table headers, name, age, city in a table that should be bold. Under name will be Dylan, Dan, and John. Under age will be 19, 22, and 24. Under city will be Monroe Township, Keyport, and Union. So you notice name, age, and city are all bold because we set them as table headers. If we went ahead and changed them from TH to TD, where they're just cells, and then run, they're no longer bold. So like I showed you, it's quite common to use this table header option rather than use the caption option. So I'm going to go ahead and post this example for us up onto Blackboard. Okay, there it is. Then next, I'm going to show you an example of a sample HTML form and how boring and ugly it looks. And then I'll show you an example of one using PHP.
Okay. Yeah. How long was that for to? No, that one's worth on your best here. But that's okay. I'm gonna just look this one other for you. But this is one from Marjorie. So, that's in.
So now we're going to change the title from table to form. And we'll have our header instead of sample table, we'll change it to contact us.
It's the end of the day, been here all day, so kind of, you know.
So since we're not using tables anymore, we go ahead and delete all of our table info. So now
Yeah.
we're going to set up a form by using form action equals confirmation.html.
Yeah.
Our method will equal post.
No, I understand.
So we're now setting up a form.
Yeah.
Or when we click the submit button, it'll take us to this confirmation.html page. So basically it's not going to do anything because we don't have a confirmation.html page uploaded on here,
But always check your spam too, because, you know.
which is why, like I said, it's very uncommon for individuals to use HTML forms. So we set label for name to create a name label. We then have to set the input type to text. We then have to match the ID. And that's all coming up as red because I forgot to get rid of one of the TRs for our table. So our ID has to equal name and our name has to equal name. And we're then going to set it as required. Then we'll add in a BR. Who remembers what BR is?
Break.
Yep. BR creates a break for us. So now we're going to create a label for a simple comment. We add another break after it. We then create a text area for our comment. Which allows us to have more room. In this instance, we'll create 4 rows and 50 columns. to allow for quite a bit of space for the individual to put in their comment. And again, we'll create a break to separate. And last but not least, you need to create a submit button that allows us to submit our information. But what's the last thing we need to do? We opened up our form tag here with the form action. We now have to close our form tag. So if we go ahead and run this, here's our contact us, our header 1. We have this possibility to put text in our name. And you'll notice we have extra space for our text area to add a comment. So let's go ahead and put in Dylan's name. Let's say he loves this class so much. What's going to happen when I go ahead and click submit?
It's gonna send you to the confirmation.html page, provided that existed.
If this page actually existed, confirmation.html, it would go to that page. It would say, oh, okay, we've got your information. Thank you. But when I click submit, we get, sorry, we can't seem to find the resource, because this confirmation.html page is not actually on the W3 schools page. So if you did not have this call to action, if I went ahead and took that out and then ran the code, and click submit, file you asked for does not exist because there's no call to action. Whenever you have a submit button, you want a call to action, your form action. So I'll post that example. And I'll show you my example that I've used in past classes where we're using PHP. So with PHP, you'll notice we have an HTML file, but the call to action goes to this PHP file. Just like in the previous example, confirmation.html. In this example, it's welcome.php. So we're asking for a name, an email, and a comment. So I'll go ahead and we'll claim that Dylan's email is dylan@hotmail.com. And he loves this class so much. When I hit the submit query, it launches that welcome.php file. Now, what I have that welcome.php file set up to do is use a PHP code called echo. So what echo does is just repeats out what you input. So it's going to say name, Dylan, email, dylan@hotmail.com, comment, loves this class so much. Well, that's what it's supposed to show. But I still have it linked to the old page. So I'll copy the code here into W3 schools. And I will fix up that link. So that it now goes to the correct link. So then when I run it, I'll put in that same info. Dylan at hotmail.com, loves this class so much. And now that it's actually linked correctly, when I hit submit query, like I said, it'll use the PHP echo and repeat out what we just typed in. So welcome, Dylan. Your email address is dylan@hotmail.com. Your comment was loves this class. So you notice there's quite a bit of difference, correct? Between an HTML form that basically does nothing as opposed to an HTML form enhanced with PHP, echoes back out input for you. So for homework over the next week, you're asked to use either PHP, JavaScript, or HTML to create a contact form, which will accept name, email, and comment as inputs. The submit button can either return the input or provide an external web page noting your input has been emailed. So in this example I gave you, the sample HTML form that does not work due to confirmation.html, you would create that confirmation.html. So you might have to submit 2 files. So that confirmation.html may just say, okay, thanks for your info. But you only have name and comment here. So you're asked for name, email, and comment. So you'd have to copy and paste your label for name and use it to create instead of name, obviously you'd set it as email. Then you would have to change your ID and name to match your label. So like I said, you would basically do that same thing. However, you'd have to set up your confirmation.html file to basically say, okay, thank you, we got your information. So that is your homework. I believe you guys have fall break next week, right? So when is this due? So this one is not due until the 23rd. So the day before our next class on the 24th. So basically you'll have 2 weeks to go ahead and do that. since next Tuesday we have no class due to fall break. All right, so if there are no questions on that, like I said, you have 2 weeks to complete the PHP form assignment. You could either use, as I showed you, my example, which just echoes back with PHP, or the more basic example that I showed you with HTML, but you would just have to create that confirmation.html page, where you would just create a page that basically says, okay, your info's been submitted. We got your info. That's all it has to say. Just a simple, paragraph or header one that just says, okay, we got your info. So are there any questions on that? And again, since we have no class next Tuesday due to the fall break, if you have extra time, go ahead and work on fixing up your proposal for the final version, even though I think it's not due till what, November or something. You'll notice, with your midterms this week and having a few days off next week, that all this stuff is just going to start coming at you once you get done with that break. So if you have time available, work on stuff earlier if you need to. So if there are no other questions, I will see all of you in 2 weeks.
Have a good break.
Have a good night, Professor.
Like if we do when we finish the project, where do we submit it again? The website and the presentation.
The what?
When we finish the project, the thing that's due in November, like where do we submit it? Like on Blackboard, like how do we find it?
So the final version of the proposal is in the 1114 folder. See where it says here, project proposal, final draft? You would click on that in the 1114 folder. Scroll down. It allows you to upload files and create your submission. So once you upload your new file, you'd go ahead and click submit.
So
Place it.
we just submitted the final draft of the project proposal for on November.
Yeah, that's not due until November. So it's in the 1114 folder. But like I said, since you have 2 days off next week for the fall break, you might have extra time available. So you might want to work on it this week.
Yeah, but I think that would get totally.
But that's just a proposal. The project or website itself, you would submit in the 12.5 folder where it says project. You'd click on that and just submit, like, if you made it on Wix, just a link. Just, I guess, add comments and type in whatever your link is.
All right, thank you.
So I think that is the West. So. You can, there might be some shot, and then that shot, probably the channel, I just, it's fine. Thank you for that. It's not it. I got it.